Hey guys, so a while ago I made a tutorial about Supercollider and the ROLI Rise, and that video showed how to set up a basic synth and then use the different touch expressions on the Seaboard to control parameters in the synth like filter cutoff and stuff like that. Even though that was fun and I think it showed some core concept, I wanted to make something a little bit more useful, I guess, because Equator, the ROLI sort of standard synth, already has a pretty good synth engine. But where I feel it sort of lacked is that you cannot easily load your own samples. You can do that, but you have to use SFZ files, and it's sort of a complicated process to actually load your own samples. So what I wanted to do is create a synth that reads samples from your hard drive and then loads them into buffers and then play them back. So I'm going to just play around with this so that you can hear the sound. You can see the interface right here. You can see that I don't have a lot of experience building interfaces. It's not very pretty, but it works. And I just want to play around a little bit with this so that you can get the idea of this, and then we'll go over the code and how you would sort of run this on your system. All right, so first a little bit of a sound example. Maybe let's try some of the symbols. So what you can see here are all the folders on the hard drive. All right, so the first thing that's important here are these global variables. You need to set them first before you can run this code. And I wanted to make this a little bit easier. I wanted Supercollider to read the name of these subdirectories, which are these, but I couldn't figure that out in the time that I had. So what you need to do is, let's say your folder with samples is on your desktop. So you would set your path variable like that, and then you could just drag that folder to there from your desktop. So let's actually go there. So you would just set it up like that, and then you would close the parentheses. So this is going to be the main folder, which contains subfolders. So for me, that's all the way hidden inside right here, there, there. So that's why you don't want to type that. And then the subdirectories there, you should have 8 of those. I think you can have less and it will still work, but I would recommend to choose 8 subfolders, even if they're empty. And you need to match the names here. So that is the thing that I wanted to do automatically, but it's still in development. Like, I'm gonna add all these things, but for now, you need to rename them exactly the same as they show up in the Finder, including capitalization. All right, so once you have that set up, you should be able to run it. And to do that, you can just put your cursor on that bracket and press Command return to run the whole code. And I'm going to go over a little bit what this does. So first, it's going to set some server options. I'm using the built-in input and output here. Actually, we don't need the input, it's just there for consistency. Normally, I use my own interface, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm using the built-in input and output. If you're using a different interface, you can run server options .devices, and then you can see a whole list of devices that are connected. And then you would type the one that you want to use in between those. What is that? In between those colons, hyphens, I don't know what that's called, quotes, in between the quotes. Then here you can set the number of channels. You can just leave that all alone. Then we get to some global variables. We're just initializing some things here, like your output and the sample. Then we're connecting the MIDI, which we're going to use later on. Now this part of the code is a little bit tricky. I actually got this from a tutorial by Eli, who has a lot of great Supercollider tutorials. And this one is in his Composing a Piece series, I believe in part 3. So if you want to get more information on how this works, I would recommend checking that. And that's actually true for a lot of this code. I mean, I'm also still learning Supercollider, so it's, you know, it's a lot of stealing code from different places and trying to make it work together. So then we're creating some buses for our dictionary, which the dictionary holds the samples. And these are some other server options. Then here I create my effects synth, which is the reverb. Then some other global variables. These are all here to control the synth later on. So these are control buses. And then when you press a note on the ROLI, then it's going to send that sort of parameter through this bus. It's the same for the interface. And then here finally we get to the synth. So the synth itself is actually pretty simple. It's I'm just using a play buff with a fixed number of channels, which isn't great. This means that if you have a mono sound, you will get an error message. It will still work, but you do get a message. Then we have the rate divided by the frequency, and because of that we can slide, or divide it by the frequency shift, multiplied by the frequency shift, sorry, and then divided by 8. This is it's also one of those, it's a little bit weird. You can experiment with all of these things, but that makes us so that we can sort of slide that the sample playback rate, or in other words the frequencies. So this is that start position parameter, and if you look up the help documentation for playbuff, you'll see that it mentions that you cannot run that after the synth is triggered. So in other words, you cannot change this while the synth is on the server. You have to change it before. And then that goes through a grain in. So this playbuff outputs to the grain in module, just to have a little bit more options there. And then we have the grain duration mapped to the touch parameter, which is the aftertouch. And then finally it goes through a basic Moog low pass filter. And then here we can multiply that with the tremolo. This also, it's a little bit of sloppy coding, but it works. That does bring up a point that when you're running this, it's a little bit on own risk, because I mean, it's not perfect yet, but I think it's a great starting point. So there is our effects synth, which is just super basic, just uses a free verb. That's basically all. And then that is the whole first block of code, and this is all to do with the sound side of things. It's not that much actually. It's pretty, like, this part is probably the trickiest one to wrap your head around. But the other things are pretty straightforward. The synth itself is very simple, and Then we have the second part, which you would also need to launch in that same order. So first you would run this, and then you can see that it's gonna do all those server options. Now it's reading my samples, which might take a while if you have a lot of samples. And then when that's all ready, it should post that to the post window, done setting up, which is this last message right here. And then the next thing is to run your actual GUI code. So just to go over this real quick, at the top here we have window.close all. That means that I can evaluate this multiple times, and it will not keep stacking windows, because it will first close windows and then open the window. And here we add the stethoscope to our window, the sound file view, which is all. I'm going to clean this up a little bit more before I share that with you guys. And then we get all the like GUI kind of stuff, which is I mean, it's all very simple. It's just a lot of code, so it looks more, maybe looks more tricky than what it is, but it's on the background it's pretty straightforward. And then on the end here we have the actual thing that triggers the synth. So this part makes sure that we can actually use all those cool expressions inside the synth itself, because we're mapping all of those to those control buses. And then finally, and I've showed this in the last video as well, we get all our MIDI CC 74, that happens to be the vertical movement. We have our glide from left to right, so you can see that that is controlling the frequency, and we have the touch. So if you just anywhere inside this region press command return, it's gonna launch that, and it's gonna launch the synth. So that's pretty much all there is to it. The next step, what I want to do is I want to use this envelope to change the tremolo shape. So right now, this tremolo right here is where is that? It's just a saw wave, so that's why we get that plucky sort of sound. And with this, we set the amount of that. So then the vertical movement is the actual speed of that. But I want to set this envelope up so that you can change the shape of the tremolo with this. That is the next step. What I also want to do is that these right now, these names from this pop-up menu, those are the variables that you set at the top of the file. So they will sort of show the actual folder structure that you have, but only if you change them there. And then the number here is the number of samples, which is a fixed value. It goes to 40. That's another thing. I wanted to be able to read the number of samples in a folder and then adjust the maximum range to this, because you can now see you get some error messages because this folder doesn't have that many samples until you get into the regular sort of sample space again. Another thing another error message that you might see is if a sample only has one channel of audio, you're gonna get a mismatch. I believe that I have that for the melodic folder. Yeah, so this one. So this is a mono file. So if I select that and then hit play, you're gonna get a channel mismatch. It will still work, but it will only be on one side. This actually sounds pretty. Some other cool things that you can try are like you can actually try to play chords with this. I use some like especially with these bells and sort of metallic cymbal sounds. So I got some nice sounds from those. And other things you can experiment with are holding down one note and then changing the start position and then holding down another note. Then you get some overlapping file, and that's especially cool. So this folder right here has some full, like, complete bass drop sounds, and this is basically like an 8 or 16 bar loop. And if you hold a very low note on this, and you just hold it down, you don't do anything, then it's just gonna play back the whole sample. But the cool thing is that you can then add another note an octave higher with a different starting position. And of course, all the parameters are completely polyphonic, otherwise it wouldn't be very useful to have a ROLI keyboard. So you can use like the tremolo and all that stuff. It's all individual, like the tremolo rate. It's individual for all the different notes, and the same goes for the sliding and the pitch sliding. So it's completely MPE sort of setup. So that was actually the original goal. But I wanted to make something that uses samples. All right, before I start repeating myself, thank you guys for watching. I'll put some links in the description to get this code. If you have questions, you can always email me about that, or put a YouTube comment or whatever. All right, thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next video.